What are the craziest things that have happened to you? Story 1. I work in a morgue and I noticed something was off with the bodies. Small pieces started to go missing. I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion until I found out who was stealing them and why. Seeing it with my own eyes, I almost lost my mind. Hello, Reddit. I've been on sick leave for 2 weeks now. The therapist prescribed me a sedative, but it only causes lethargy and brain fog. And most importantly, it doesn't help. It doesn't go away. This feeling of oppressive, nauseating horror that has eaten into my bones. I can't sleep, I can't eat. I close my eyes, and I see them, those ugly dolls of his eternal family. And the most terrible thing is that it all started with such a trifle that it's even funny now. My name is Sarah, I'm 34, and for the last 8 years, I worked as a nurse in the morgue at the city hospital in Milwaukee. It was not a place for the faint of heart, but I got used to it. Crappy funding, constant understaffing, corpses in droves, mostly overdoses, car accidents, domestic disputes, the standard set for any large industrial city. The team was small, and its core was Dr. Richard Hayes, our pathologist. Dr. Hayes, he was pushing 60, looked every bit of it, and then some. Gray hair, always perfectly styled, an impeccably ironed lab coat, old school manners. Everyone called him the Silver Fox. He wasn't a recluse or a gloomy type, like many imagine morgue workers to be. At lunch, he could spend 10 minutes discussing the taste of steak at a new restaurant, or laugh sincerely at jokes about Trump and Biden. He watched The Mandalorian, read detective novels, drank coffee with cinnamon. An absolutely normal, adequate, pleasant person to talk to. We all respected him, and newcomers were a little afraid of him. He was strict about protocols, but always fair. Not the slightest hint of anything off. The first warning sign, which I ignored at the time, sounded about 3 months ago. A guy was admitted, Michael, 24 years old, overdose, seemingly nothing special, but he had an amazing tattoo, a huge geometric wolf on the entire left side of his chest, from the collarbone almost to the solar plexus. Very detailed, expensive work. I remember thinking, while processing him, it's a pity, such art will go to waste. Dr. Hayes performed the autopsy, concluded death from acute heart failure due to opiate intoxication. Everything as usual. Then I went to prepare the body for release to the relatives, to wash and dress it. And when I was wiping his chest, my fingers stumbled upon a strange spot, right in the center of the tattoo, where the wolf's head was. The skin was different, to the touch, like plastic, too smooth, without pores. The color was almost perfectly matched, but under the bright light of the lamp, you could see that it was slightly more pink, slightly more dead, if one can say that about a corpse's skin. I chalked it up to post-mortem changes, dehydration, the effect of formalin. Maybe I just mistook it for something else. But a splinter had lodged in my mind. I noted to myself, strange, and forgot about it. The second incident would knock anyone off their feet. A month later, Edith, 78, was admitted to us. Massive stroke. A sweet old lady. Her medical record, which I always review before preparation, indicated that she was missing the distal phalanx of the little finger on her left hand. She lost it as a child in a farm accident. I noted that. Dr. Hayes performed the autopsy. Everything was clear. I started washing the body and I was stunned. On her left hand was a little finger, a whole one. It was crooked. The skin on it was a different shade, darker and more wrinkled than on the rest of the hand, and it was sewn on with coarse, almost cynical stitches of surgical thread. This was not professional work. It looked like a surrealist's nightmare. I freaked out. I found Hayes, who was filling out paperwork in his office. "Doctor," I said, "what is this?" Edith's chart says no phalanx, but in its place, This. He didn't even bat an eye. He looked up at me with his calm blue eyes and said, "Ah, yes," the daughter called. "They're having an open casket funeral," she begged, to make her mother look presentable so the missing finger wouldn't disturb the guests. Had to improvise. Stitched it from a skin flap from the thigh. A bit crooked, but under a layer of makeup, it won't be noticeable. And he smiled his usual kind smile. The explanation was so plausible that I felt like an idiot. Well, it happens. A person accommodated the relatives, did what he could. But inside, I felt cold. I didn't believe it. From that moment on, I began a quiet, paranoid surveillance. I created an encrypted file on my phone. Our morgue takes photos of all bodies upon admission if the death is unnatural. It's a standard procedure for the police. I started comparing these photos with what I saw after Hayes' autopsies, and it started a real hell. Case number 1, John, 55, chronic alcoholism, death from cirrhosis. In the admission photo, he had a torn old earlobe on his left ear, an old scar. After Hayes' autopsy, the earlobe was perfectly smooth, like a baby's. In the autopsy protocol, in the distinguishing features section, Hayes wrote, "No scars or visible injuries found." Case number 2, Sarah, 19, suicide, hanging. In the admission photo, long, well-groomed nails painted with dark polish. After the autopsy, all fingernails on her hands were missing, simply torn off. Hayes stated in the report, nails detached during procedures due to post-mortem rigor mortis and tissue fragility, but all 10, and so neatly. Case number 3, Marcus, 41, died at a construction site, fell from scaffolding. A large man, on his right chest, he had a large mole and a nipple piercing. After the autopsy, the piercing was in place, but the nipple was gone. In its place was just smooth skin. In the report, Hayes wrote, "Congenital athelia, absence of nipple." I checked Marcus's old medical records. There was no mention of any athelia. This was no longer chaos. This was a system. He took things that wouldn't be noticeable during a quick inspection by relatives. Areas of skin with unique tattoos, scars, moles, birthmarks, toes, nipples, earlobes, fragments of skin with unusual texture or color. Anything that could be blamed on trauma sustained during life or during the autopsy or on a congenital defect. I went to our department head. I laid out everything, showed him my file. I was politely but firmly hinted that I was overworking, that working in a morgue is associated with professional burnout, and advised me to take a vacation. Dr. Hayes was a luminary, a professional with a 25-year impeccable reputation, and I was just a nurse, my word against his. Then I went to the police. The first visit was humiliating. The detective, a young guy, listened to me with a look as if I was talking about an alien abduction. He politely said he would look into it, but his eyes showed he thought I was crazy. I didn't give up. The second time I came with printouts of my before and after photos, with excerpts from logs where discrepancies were noted. But the main trump card was different. In our morgue, cameras were only at the exit and in the main hall for security, but they covered the corridor leading to the pathology department. I reviewed the archives for the last 6 months, focusing on Hayes' night shifts, and I found a pattern. Almost after every night shift, closer to morning, he would leave his office with small bio bags, the kind usually used for histology samples or small medical waste. But he didn't put them in the general biological waste container. He put them in his briefcase, always. I recorded the dates and provided the video to the police. Their attitude changed instantly. They became seriously interested. They approached a judge and got a warrant to search Hayes' house. His house was in a quiet, prosperous suburb. A manicured lawn, a neat white fence, a swing on the porch, a picture of idol. What they found inside forever changed the perception of that place. The house itself inside was ordinary, even boring. IKEA furniture, family photos, he was divorced, children lived in another state, everything clean and tidy. The hell began in the basement. It had been converted into a professional workshop, not a torture chamber, no, precisely a workshop. There were industrial refrigerators, not household ones, but the kind used in laboratories. In them, neatly arranged in transparent containers, sorted by type and, apparently, by quality, lay pieces of human skin, like fabric pieces in a tailor's shop. Next to it, a table with surgical instruments, not for autopsies, but for fine work, scalpels, needle holders, the finest needles, threads, shelves with jars in which floated in formalin, eyes, dozens of eyes, and there were shelves with books on anatomy, dermatology, tanning leather, and on making dolls. And there they were, the dolls. There were about 30 of them, each about 50-70 centimeters tall. They didn't look like Venus from Silent Hill or anything obviously demonic. They were creepier. They were made with monstrous, perverted diligence. They were sewn from human skin, a patchwork quilt of races, genders, and ages. One doll had an arm covered in tattoos. I recognized that very geometric wolf from Michael's chest, and a leg made of dark, almost black skin. The hair on their heads was real, neatly sewn onto the scalp skin. The faces, God, those faces, they weren't carved, they were assembled. One doll's mouth was sewn from 5 different pieces of skin to create a semblance of a smile. The eyes of a doll were made from pieces of colored film simulating irises, and it was later revealed that they were pieces of real human irises, dried and processed. One of the dolls was dressed in a tiny, perfectly sewn copy of a U.S. Marine Corps uniform, and on its forearm was that very wolf. He wasn't just collecting parts. He was creating personalities. He was appropriating other people's lives, other people's stories, sewing them into his ugly golems. He gave them names. A folder named Eternal Family was found on his computer. In it, a database. In this database was a detailed log for each donor. Name, age, cause of death, a photo from life, from where, social media, and a detailed description of the trophy. Michael T. 24, opiate intoxication, tattoo wolf on left chest, skin quality excellent, suitable for Legionnaire. Edith G. 78, stroke, skin of little finger, left hand, texture suitable for aging patriarch. John P. 55, cirrhosis, earlobe, scar tissue, interesting texture, for scar. Sarah L. 19, suicide, nail plates, healthy, long, for collection, well-groomed hands of matron. Legionnaire, patriarch, matron, face. These were the names of his dolls, his eternal family. He kept this journal more meticulously than medical records. The investigation established that he had been doing this for at least 15 years. He moved to Milwaukee from Ohio 10 years ago, and when the cops contacted colleagues there, they recalled several strange incidents with missing body fragments in the morgue where he worked before. The cases were blamed on the negligence of junior staff. He was arrested. He didn't resist. During interrogations, he was calm and polite as always. His lawyers are now building a defense based on insanity, talking about a severe mental disorder, about a collecting syndrome. The investigation is still ongoing, and I quit. I can't enter a morgue. The smell of formalin now makes me vomit. Xanax doesn't help because it can't erase from my memory those shelves in the basement, those soulless glass eyes staring at me, that his family, assembled from the parts of people I was supposed to protect, whom I was supposed to ensure a dignified passage to their final rest. And now I sit at night and think, not about Hayes. He is one. How many more of these quiet, normal, polite silver foxes are working right now in morgues across the country? To how many of them do we entrust the bodies of our loved ones? And the main, most nightmarish question that haunts me: who was he collecting before this? All those 15 years? What happened to his first dolls? And where are they now? Story 2. We were playing hide and seek in a shopping mall. One of us was never found. The story is longer than it seems. Submitted 15 years ago, but I'm still haunted by that shadow. Hi everyone. I've been reading this subreddit for a long time, and I've thought about sharing this story more than once. I only decided to do it now. I'm 27, and 15 years have passed since then, but some details are still right in front of my eyes, as if it were yesterday. This isn't just a scary bedtime story. It's a story about how one innocent childhood decision almost led to the irreparable. I will write in as much detail as possible because every little thing mattered here. For context, my name is Lisa, and my friend's name is Emily. We were both 12, inseparable since kindergarten. We lived in a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was one of those sleepy, safe towns where everyone knows each other. And the main entertainment for teenagers was a trip to the Midway Mall, a huge two-story shopping center with endless corridors, a fountain, and a dozen pointless stores. That day, October 18th, was damp and gray. The sky was covered with thick clouds, and a cold wind was blowing from Lake Michigan. School was over, and my mom, Martha, decided that Emily and I needed new winter shoes. Emily was tall for her age, slender, with long chestnut hair that she always braided into a thick plait. I, on the other hand, was short and chubby, with perpetually messy red curls. Mom was in a bad mood. She had some problems at work and was in a hurry. She bought us shoes in the first store, shoved a 20 into each of our hands for pocket money, and said, "Girls, I need to quickly stop by Mr. Johnson's office. It's on the way. He's waiting for some documents. I'll be back in an hour and a half at most. Hang out here, buy something at Claire's, get some ice cream. Don't leave the central atrium. Understood?" We, of course, nodded like obedient daughters. But what 12-year-old would sit in one spot for a whole hour? The idea came to us almost simultaneously. We were standing by the fountain, throwing coins into the water, when Emily said, "Hey, what about hide and seek? It's perfect here." The Midway Mall really was perfect for it. Multi-level, with labyrinths of departments, high shelves, fitting room sofas, and endless corners. We discussed the rules. Hide only on the first floor. Don't go out to the parking lot. Don't go into service areas. The seeker counts to 60, standing with their back to the fountain. We decided to use our phones. We had simple Nokia button phones. If you can't find someone within 10 minutes, you call. I was the first seeker. I buried my face in the cold marble of the fountain and started counting. I heard Emily's quick footsteps fading in the direction of the Abercrombie and Fitch corner. After reaching 60, I yelled, "Coming to find you!" and rushed off in pursuit. I looked for her for about 5 minutes, peeking behind mannequins, into fitting rooms, under counters. Nothing. Then I decided to change tactics and hide myself to lure her out. I chose Old Navy. There was a section with discounted jeans, piled high with boxes. I found a perfect gap between a tall rack of jeans and the wall, from where I could see the whole store and part of the corridor. I crouched down and hid. Time started to crawl. At first it was fun. I watched people's feet, tried to guess whose sneakers they might be. Then it got boring. I took out my phone. 10 minutes had passed. 15. Silence. Emily didn't call. Inside, the first tiny seed of anxiety began to stir. Maybe she was offended that I was taking so long to find her. Maybe she went to the second fountain, near the elevators. I crawled out of my hiding spot and brushed myself off. The store was almost empty. I called Emily. The subscriber is temporarily unavailable. There was no voicemail. Great, her battery died, I thought with irritation. Perfect. I went out into the corridor, and started circling the first floor more systematically. I went into Sports Chalet, Hot Topic, even peeked into the women's restroom near the food court. Nowhere. The anxiety, cold and sticky, began to spread through my stomach. I called again. Same result. And then I noticed something strange. The emergency exit at the end of the corridor, next to Bed Bath & Beyond, was slightly ajar. Not wide, just a couple of centimeters, but the aluminum latch that was supposed to lock it from the inside was hanging loose. I moved closer. A cold, damp smell of gasoline and parking lot air came from the crack. I didn't dare look out. Instead, I ran to the fountain, to our meeting point. No one. That's when I finally called my mom. My voice was trembling. "Mom, I can't find Emily. She's missing." Mom, through my sobs and confused explanations, kept her cool. "Lisa, calm down. Wait for me at the information desk. Right now. Don't go anywhere." She rushed over in 7 minutes, pale as a ghost. We immediately went to the security desk, which was near the main entrance. A man in his 50s was sitting there, with a tired face and a badge that said, "Frank, Senior Security Officer." Mom, trying to speak calmly, explained the situation. Frank listened and nodded. "Girls, they're always hanging around somewhere, probably in the toy department." But I insisted. "We were playing hide and seek. She would have come out by now, and her phone is off." Something in my panic must have convinced him. He sighed. "Okay, let's take a look at the footage." He led us into a small room behind the counter, crammed with monitors. Life in the shopping center flickered on them in gray-green tones. Frank asked me for the time and place where I last saw Emily. I pointed to the fountain. He rewound the recording, and there we saw ourselves. 2 girls by the fountain, chatting. Then I cover my face with my hands and start counting. Emily runs off to the right, out of frame, with a sly smile. I, after finishing counting, run in the same direction. Then Frank switched to a camera inside Old Navy. We saw me slip behind the rack of jeans and disappear from view. We watched, holding our breath. The time code ran forward. 2 minutes. 5, 10. People entered and left the frame. And then, at the 13-minute mark, a man appeared in the frame. He was dressed inconspicuously. A gray hooded sweatshirt, dark jeans, sneakers. He didn't enter the store, but rather slowed down as he passed by, and his gaze slid exactly towards the spot where I was hiding. He walked on, but returned a minute later. He stopped at the entrance to Old Navy, pretended to be on the phone, but his eyes constantly darted around the store, scanning the space. He was looking for something. Then he entered. He didn't walk between the shelves, but went straight along the far wall, as if he knew where he was going. He approached my rack. The camera was from another angle, and it didn't capture the actual gap where I was sitting, but you could see him leaning down, as if picking something up from the floor. He said something. Then he straightened up, looked around, and walked back quickly, decisively, towards the store exit. He was leading Emily by the hand. She was walking with a strange, shuffling gait, her head bowed, her long braids swung behind her back. She looked as if she was in a deep sleep while awake. She didn't resist, didn't look around. She just walked, like a puppet. My breath caught. Mom screamed and grabbed Frank's arm. "Oh my God, that's her!" Frank transformed. From a tired bureaucrat, he turned into a commander in a second. He grabbed his radio. All posts! Code Amber! Suspect! Male in gray hoodie, leading a girl approx. 12 years old, chestnut hair, pink jacket. Direction, East Corridor, emergency exits. Block all exits. No one leaves." He switched the camera to the one above that emergency exit I had noticed. We saw the man push the door open with his shoulder. It was apparently stiff on its spring, and pull Emily out onto the gray concrete of the parking lot. The door slowly closed behind them. "Parking lot, Sector 4B, everyone over there!" Frank shouted into the radio. We ran out of the room and rushed to the main entrance to get to the parking lot. What happened next, I remember in fragments. Shouts, sirens of arriving police cars. A crowd of security guards gathered around something in the far corner of the parking lot, where old graffiti-covered trash containers stood. We ran over. The man in the gray sweatshirt was lying on the ground, his hands twisted behind his back with plastic handcuffs. Emily was standing nearby. She was crying, shaking, but she was conscious. A paramedic was already hurrying towards her, and a couple of steps away from them, the door of an old, rusty sedan the color of khaki was open. On the passenger seat lay a roll of packing tape and a few coils of rope. The police searched the man. In the pocket of his sweatshirt, they found a syringe filled with a clear liquid. It later turned out to be clonazepam, a powerful sedative, a truth serum that he apparently planned to use to fully sedate her once they were in the car. He had only managed to administer a small dose when he found her hiding behind a rack in another store, saying something like, "Your friend Lisa is waiting for you at the service entrance. Let's go quickly." Emily, dazed from the game and trusting, went with him. The creepiest thing we learned from the interrogation: this man, his name was Gary Walters, wasn't a random maniac. He had worked at the mall a few years earlier as a handyman and knew all the camera blind spots and that very emergency exit door, which, due to negligence, hadn't been fitted with a loud alarm. He had heard us by the fountain, agreeing on the rules of the game. He realized we were alone, and he decided to take advantage of the situation. He stalked each of us separately, like a predator. He knew that one would hide and the other would seek, and it was the perfect moment to snatch one of us while the other wasn't looking. His plan was simple and terrible. He wouldn't have started looking for her if I hadn't hidden. He used our own game as a cover. Emily is okay, thank God. She went through therapy. We both did. She grew up, studied to become a psychologist, and now helps children who have experienced trauma. But we rarely talk about that day. It's like a scar that aches when the weather changes. Sometimes, when I walk past a large shopping mall and see children playing hide and seek, my heart clenches. I look at their carefree faces and think about how evil doesn't always look like a monster from a horror movie. Sometimes it's just a man in a gray hoodie who blends into the crowd and just waits for his chance. He waited until two little girls created their own trap. So, Gary Walters, wherever you are now, let's not meet, ever. That day in the parking lot wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of a long, dark tunnel. Physically, Emily was saved, but mentally, it was as if she had been replaced. In the first few weeks, she was a shadow of her former self. She stopped braiding her famous hair. She said she couldn't stand the feeling of someone else's fingers on the back of her head. She slept with the light on, and her father installed new, heavy-duty locks on her bedroom windows. Once at school, a classmate accidentally brushed against her shoulder while passing by. She didn't react with a scream, but with an icy, piercing silence, and simply left the lesson without a word. Our relationship changed forever. We were no longer Lisa and Emily, the inseparable duo. Now we were that Lisa and that Emily. That shadow in the gray hoodie stood between us. We tried to return to a normal life, went to the movies, chatted about boys, but at some point, the conversation would always die down. I would catch her gaze, in which I read a silent question. What if you hadn't called your mom? What if you had chosen a different hiding spot? I asked myself those same questions. The strangest and perhaps the hardest thing for me started about 6 months later. I developed what my therapist called hypervigilance. I couldn't be in public places without scanning every single person. I looked for gray hoodies. I studied people's gaits, a man slowing his pace, anxiety, someone looking towards children, panic. I became an expert on surveillance cameras. I knew where the blind spots were in every new place I visited. It was exhausting. I lived in a state of constant low-grade fear. The trial of Gary Walters was short. He pleaded guilty on all counts, trying to avoid a life sentence. At the sentencing hearing, I saw him up close for the first time, without his hood. He was the most ordinary man. No scars, no insane gaze, just an ordinary face. And that was his most terrifying feature. The prosecutor read his testimony, and there was one phrase that haunts me to this day. When asked why he chose us, he said, "They looked available. They were absorbed in their game. It was easy. Available." That word cut into me like a knife. We were children. We were innocent. And he turned that into a vulnerability. He was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. It seemed like justice had been served. But there was no sense of relief. There was only emptiness. A couple of years later, when Emily and I were in high school, we had a real conversation one day. We were sitting at her house, drinking hot chocolate, and she said something we had both been silent about all that time. You know, I remember his smell, cheap cologne and cigarettes, and I remember how he found me. I was hiding behind those huge jigsaw puzzle boxes in Toys R Us. He didn't search for me randomly. He walked straight to my aisle, bent down, and looked right at me, as if someone had already shown him where I was. That made my blood run cold. We had always thought he had just stumbled upon one of us by a lucky, for him, chance. But what if he had been watching us longer? What if he saw where we both hid and simply chose his target? That thought was even more terrifying. Now, 15 years later, I still live with this. I work as a graphic designer, working from home, partly because I'm still uncomfortable in large open-plan offices. I check if my apartment door is locked 5 times a night. I never wear headphones outside because I have to hear everything happening around me. And Emily, she, as I said, became a psychologist. She is strong in her own way, but sometimes, very rarely, she sends me a message late at night. Just one word, Gray. And I know she had a dream about that day. And I write back to her, I'm here. And we both sit on opposite sides of our phone screens, 2 30-year-old women, forever bound by the trauma of 12-year-old girls. The story didn't end in that parking lot. It continues inside us every day. It's in our hypervigilance, in our quiet fears, in our memory that clings to the smell of cheap cologne and the sight of a slightly open door to nowhere. The rescue was a moment, but the scar is forever. Story 3. My name is Thomas. I'm an architect from Prague, and after the failure of a major project, I desperately needed an escape. Not a vacation, but a complete disappearance. I found an old Volvo XC70 2004 model on a specialized website. The perfect car to get lost in the mountains of northern Italy. The owner, a certain Roberto, replied briefly but politely. His profile was verified. The reviews were positive, though few. Reliable car. Roberto explained everything clearly. We met in a deserted parking lot near Trieste, late in the evening. Roberto turned out to be a quiet man in his 50s, with sad eyes and calm movements. He handed me the keys. I transferred the money. She loves mountain serpentines, he said in farewell, patting the hood. His hand lingered on the metal for a moment, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. I got on the highway and then turned onto a narrow road winding up into the foothills of the Alps. It was already the middle of the night. The car behaved flawlessly, and I began to relax, breathing in the cool pine air. The first 2 hours were perfect, until I heard the sound, a quiet, metallic sound, as if something small and hard was rolling across a sheet of iron and hitting a wall. The sound was coming from the trunk. I turned up the radio volume. Old car, I tried to convince myself, but the sound repeated. Not a rolling sound anymore, but more of a scratching one, as if something alive was trying to get out. A primal fear gripped me. I remembered Roberto's calm face. No, it can't be. But adrenaline was already pounding in my temples. I saw a gas station sign and turned into a deserted gas station, lost in the forest. The station was closed, but there was a light on under the canopy. I turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. My heart was pounding. I got out and approached the trunk. Inside, just a spare tire and a toolkit, all clean. I was already sighing with relief when I noticed that the trunk floor was uneven. The carpet on one side was raised. I pulled on it. Underneath was a removable panel. I moved it aside. In the niche lay a sturdy cardboard box tied with twine. It gave off a sweetish chemical smell that turned my stomach. My hands were shaking. I untied the twine. The contents assembled in my head into a dreadful, undeniable puzzle. 2 pairs of handcuffs, a roll of wide duct tape, a syringe in sterile packaging, and several ampules of clear liquid. 3 passports with photos of different people. None were Roberto. All were expired. A folding knife, perfectly clean, but smelling of the same chemicals. This wasn't a thief's kit. This was a hunter's kit. I grabbed the black leather-bound notebook lying on top. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, dates, routes, descriptions of cars and people, and then came other entries. 1403, rental, Fiat Panda. Client, Marco, waiter. Route, Trieste, Udine. Stop at picnic area, 23G. Substance administered. Relocation. Delivery to the workshop. Liquidation at 5:20. Items disposed of. The words liquidation, disposed of, hung in the air like icy nails. I frantically flipped to the last entry, dated today. Rental, Volvo XC70. Client, Thomas, architect. Route, Trieste, Dolomites. Planned stop, Esso gas station, route SR52, Bazar 2. Ideal conditions, secluded location. I broke out in a sweat. He knew my route. He knew where I would stop. This car, this polite Roberto, it was all a trap. A GPS tracker must have been hidden in the cabin. I slammed the box shut, threw it back, and slammed the trunk shut. I had to run to the police. I jumped into the car, turned the key. The engine caught and stalled. I turned the key again. The starter cranked uselessly. Panic tightened my throat. I looked at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was on empty. I forgot to refuel. No, I was sure the tank was full. My thoughts were jumbled. Suddenly, headlights appeared on the road behind me. They were approaching slowly, unhurriedly. This wasn't just a passing car. It was moving at the speed of a hunter. It stopped 10 meters behind me. The headlights shone directly into my mirrors, blinding me. I couldn't make out the model or the driver. The door opened and closed. Heavy, measured footsteps on the asphalt. They were approaching my door. I instinctively hit the central lock button. My heart was racing wildly. I looked at the locked door. It wouldn't save me. The window would be smashed with the same crowbar from the trunk. A shadow fell on the glass. The figure froze at my door. I clenched my eyes shut, bracing for the impact. But instead of the sound of breaking glass, a calm, low voice spoke. "Thomas? Car trouble?" I slowly turned my head. Outside the window, in the headlights' glare, stood not Roberto. It was a man in a road service uniform. A radio was on his shoulder. Behind him, I saw a yellow emergency vehicle with flashing beacons. Who are you?" I stammered, still not believing it. "Road patrol," he said. "We patrol this section. Saw you stalled. Open up." Tears of relief welled up in my eyes. I unlocked the door and got out, trembling. "You don't understand. In the car, in the trunk, he's a maniac." I began to incoherently, breathlessly, tell him about the box, the notebook, about Roberto. The patrolman, who introduced himself as Luca, listened to me, his face remaining serious. "Show me," he said shortly. I opened the trunk, lifted the carpet, and pulled out the box. Luca opened it, quickly examined the contents. His face turned to stone. "All right, Thomas, get in my car. It's warm there." I'll call the carabinieri." He took the box, and I, still shaking, followed him to his vehicle. He opened the passenger door, and I climbed in. The interior smelled of coffee and gasoline. It was the best smell of my life. Luca got behind the wheel, put the box on the back seat, and picked up the radio. "Center, Patrol 712, receiving." He spoke into the radio, giving our coordinates. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. It was over. I was lucky. Luca finished the conversation and put the radio down. He turned to me, and in the dim light of the dashboard, I saw his eyes. Calm, deep. It was then that a blinding lightning bolt of terror finally shot through my brain. Those eyes, they were an exact copy of Roberto's eyes. The same shape, the same slant, the same tired depth. But now they held not kindness, but a cold, indifferent confidence. You're Roberto's brother?" I whispered, moving away from the door. Luca smiled. It was a thin, stretched smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Roberto?" He chuckled softly. "No, Thomas. Roberto is just a name, a convenient mask for rentals." He reached for the glove compartment and opened it. Inside, among papers, lay an injection syringe, identical to the one in the box. "You see," he continued in his even, methodical tone, "working on the roads. It's the perfect cover. No one is surprised to see my car on the side of the road. No one asks questions, and the GPS tracker in your Volvo led me right to you. I just drained the gas on the way, remotely, while you were driving. You know, modern technology." He turned to me, holding the syringe. "Roberto was sentimental. He kept those stupid diaries. He got caught. But the business, the family business, must continue. I'm just more practical." I pulled the door handle. Locked. Central locking. Luca slowly approached, the syringe gleaming dully in his hand. "You could have been just another entry, Thomas. But now you're a witness." I had no choice. I lunged forward, not away from him, but at him. Instead of trying to dodge the syringe, I headbutted him in the face with all my strength. There was a crunch. He gasped in surprise and pain. The syringe fell from his hand and rolled under the seat. I took advantage of his confusion, frantically felt for the old mechanical lock button on my door, and pressed it. A loud click sounded. I tumbled out of the car onto the asphalt. Luca, with a bleeding nose, was already jumping out from the other side, but I was faster. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Not on the road, but into the forest, into the same impenetrable darkness that had terrified me to death just an hour before. I ran, not watching my path, stumbling over roots, hearing his hoarse breathing and cursing behind me. He was after me. The flashlight in his hand picked tree trunks out of the darkness. I reached a small stream and, without thinking, jumped into the icy water. I waded upstream for about 50 meters, then climbed out onto the opposite bank and hid behind a boulder, trying to muffle the beating of my own heart. He ran up to the stream. The flashlight beam darted across the water. He stood for a few seconds, listening. Then he spat and muttered something under his breath. I only caught one word. "Next time." Then his footsteps began to recede. Soon I heard his car start and drive away. I sat behind the rock for a long time, shaking from cold and shock. Then I reached into my pocket for my phone. No signal, of course, but in desperation, I remembered the emergency call via satellite feature. I activated it and, holding down the buttons, sent my coordinates. 40 minutes later, the carabinieri arrived. They found me sitting there in the mud by the stream. Luca, whose real name was Daniele Galli, was arrested the next morning on his way to his shift. In his house, they found a collection not of things, but of photographs, pictures of people in car trunks, pictures of their personal belongings, and a fresh, undeveloped shot taken by a hidden camera on his uniform, my face distorted with horror in the headlights of his car. They weren't just murderers, they were collectors. Roberto collected things, Daniele collected moments of pure fear. I didn't return to Prague immediately. I gave testimony. The investigator said that if I hadn't looked in that trunk, hadn't run, and hadn't used the satellite signal, I would have become another exhibit in their horrifying collection. Now I'm back in my office in Prague. I still wake up from nightmares at night. I will never rent cars from private individuals again, and I always check the trunk. But now I do it, not with the tremble of a victim, but with the cold vigilance of a hunter who knows that monsters are real, and sometimes they wear the uniforms of those who are supposed to save you. But most importantly, I know that even in the most hopeless situation, there is a chance you have to fight for. 6 months passed. The trial of Daniele Galli was quick. He was found guilty of complicity in 7 murders and multiple kidnappings. The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Roberto, his brother, received the same sentence. It seemed like a period had been put at the end. The nightmares didn't stop. I returned to work and couldn't concentrate. Every time I got into any car, a taxi, or car-sharing vehicle, I checked the trunk first. My friends thought I had a nervous disorder, and they were right, but they didn't understand the full depth of it. One evening, sorting through the mail, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Old, worn. It showed the very Volvo XC70 I had rented. It was standing in a garage, and on its bumper, barely noticeable, hung that very black hiking backpack I had left in the cabin on the night of my escape. My backpack. On the back of the photograph, only 2 words were written: my trophy. It could only mean one thing. They had an accomplice, a third one, the one who remained free, the one who was now playing with me. I didn't go to the police. What could I tell them? That I received an anonymous letter? They would have written it off as my paranoia again. Instead, I went to the archive of the local newspaper. I looked for any information about the Galli family. Days blurred into weeks, and then, in a 20-year-old article about a traffic accident, I found it. The Galli couple, the parents of Roberto and Daniele, had died. Their third son, who was in the car, survived 15-year-old Lino Galli. The case was closed. The boy moved to relatives in another region. No one had heard from him since. Lino, the third brother. Now I had a name. I found his traces on social networks. The accounts had been abandoned years ago, but in one old photo where he was shot from the back, I recognized the same road service uniform. He also worked in that system. He was among them, and then I understood his game. Roberto collected things. Daniele collected moments of fear, and Lino collected the victims themselves, the survivors. He watched us. He prolonged the pleasure. I knew it wouldn't end until I ended it myself. I bought the simplest, cheapest button phone. I inserted a new SIM card and sent one SMS to the number I found in the old court documents, the number of their family lawyer. I wrote just one phrase: I know about Lino. I want to meet. Just him and me. The reply came an hour later. Abandoned quarry, outside the city. Tomorrow at 22 Green. Come alone. The night was cold and moonless. I stood on the edge of the quarry, filled with black water. There wasn't a soul around. Only the wind hummed in the wires. He emerged from the darkness, tall, thin, with the same tired look as his brothers. Thomas, he said. His voice was quiet, almost affectionate. You are persistent. I appreciate that. This is the end, Lino, I said. My hands were clenched into fists. He smiled. How naive. For you, this is just the beginning. My brothers were cruel. They took bodies. I take souls. I will haunt you until the end of your days. You will see me in every crowd, hear me in every rustle. You will never be free. That is my trophy, your eternal fear. He turned to leave, confident in his impunity, but I was ready for this. "Lino Galli!" I shouted after him. He turned around, and at that moment, figures in uniform rose from behind the stones and ruins. Dozens of policemen. Among them was my investigator. I hadn't gone to the police alone. I had gone to his home and showed him everything: the photograph, my research, the story about Lino, and we had developed this plan. My SMS was the bait, and our conversation was his confession, recorded on a dictaphone. Lino stood, looking at me. His face showed neither anger nor fear, only a cold, chilling disappointment. He hadn't expected the victim to become the hunter. They led him away in handcuffs. The investigator came up to me. "You took a huge risk, Thomas. To live in peace, sometimes you have to stop being afraid," I replied. That's when it really ended. The 3 Galli brothers were behind bars. Their collection was destroyed. I still sometimes wake up in a cold sweat. I still sometimes check the trunk. But now I do it not out of fear, but out of habit. Because I survived. I won. And most importantly, I learned to look my fear in the eye and make it look away.